Welcome back. Chapter 2. She clutched the MapQuest printout in her hand as she drove. The directions were simple. Leave Williamsburg on Highway 5, the one that led to all plantations, and just a few miles out, she'd come to Mechturn Road. 3 miles later, she was to take a right onto Edeline Road, then drive through the town until she ended up at her new old house. Mechturn Road was easy to find, but she thought there was a mistake because it meandered through forests that seemed to have been there since the earth began. She read that Edeline was in the middle of nature's preserve, but she hadn't expected to be this close to primordial forest. She moved to one side as a couple of men in a big black truck pulling a fishing boat with 2 motors on the back rushed past her. They waved their thanks for giving them the right of way. Edeline Road was clearly marked, and she was glad to see that the surface was well maintained. She'd been a little concerned that it would be gravel road with weeds down the center. About a mile before she reached the town, the wild-looking forest gave way to specimen oaks and beeches and big sycamores. She didn't have to be told that she had entered land that at one time had been part of a rich plantation. When she reached the center of Edeline, she paused for a moment to look at it. The website had been only partially right. The town was half as big as it seemed in the photos, but it was twice as charming. Big willow trees hung over the street so that all the parking was in the shade. There wasn't a new building anywhere, and the old structures had been maintained beautifully. The church was on her left, and on impulse, she turned right so she'd go through the heart of the place. She wanted to see the park-like areas that the original Edeline had designed, and she wanted to see that oak tree. Another left took her to the Main Street Lardton. Joss had seen that nearly all the street names were of Scottish origins, and the road through the middle was Larton. Since ton was an old way to shorten town, that meant that Angus Harcourt had named the street Lardstown. She guessed that back in the 18th century, the stable lad, Angus Harcourt, had raised himself to being the lord of a clan and wanted people to know that he owned all of it. Jocelyn saw an ice cream parlor that looked like something off a movie set and a store of used books. Gold mine, she said out loud. Out-of-print books were some of her favorite things in life. She saw a little grocery store with produce in a bin and in front, and a woman wearing a long skirt with a tasseled belt. There was a bandana tied around her head, and her shirt had been tie-dyed. Wonder if she went to Woodstock, Jocelyn muttered. There was the usual store full of old furniture and some other businesses. And in the middle, on a big grassy circle, was an enormous oak tree. There were half a dozen benches under its shade, and 2 teenagers were kissing, while some younger kids were laughing at them. The last 2 houses before the road disappeared into the overhanging trees were the ones in the photos on the internet. They were big, white, and looked inviting. In front of one, a woman was sweeping the porch, and as though she knew who Jocelyn was, she halted her broom and stared. Jocelyn was so absorbed in looking back at the woman that she almost missed the turn at the end of Larton. 1 block down was a sign that said, Tamway. She glanced in her rearview mirror and saw that the woman was no longer on the porch. She probably went inside to start the gossip line. What would they say? That the outsider is here to take over our beloved Miss Eddie's house? Jocelyn drove slowly down the country road. There were only 3 houses along the way, and unless she missed her guess, they'd once been part of the plantation of Edeline Manor. She could see that there were old sections on the house, but they'd been remodeled and expanded over the years. When she came to some stone columns that were nearly hidden by vines, she knew she reached it. There was a little marble plaque in one of them, and she could see enough letters to know what it said. That is it, she thought, and pulled into the drive. There were so many huge trees that she could see nothing, and it occurred to her that maybe what she'd seen were photos of the house before it was torn down. She knew from the research she'd done at school that you had to read the fine print under the pictures to see if the house still existed. Suddenly, the trees parted and she saw the house, and it was exactly like the photos. Because she visited many old houses in her life, she immediately saw that the house was in pristine condition. There were houses less than a year old that weren't as well kept as this one was. Every window, shutter, and rain gutter was perfect. On each side of the house was a wing with its own little porch, and for a moment, Joss thought about knocking on the doors and asking permission to go inside, but that was ridiculous. With her eyes on the house, looking at every inch of it, she got out, opened the back of the car, and took out her suitcase. She pulled it behind her as she climbed the wooden steps up to the small porch in front of the door. She took the key out of her jacket pocket, inserted it into the old lock, and when it turned, her heart began to beat quickly. "Hello? Anybody here?" Jocelyn called as she opened the old door. From the look of it, the door was original to the house, which made it over 200 years old. She left her big black suitcase by the door and slowly walked further inside, her heels echoing on the bare wooden floor. She was in the entrance hall, and as she hoped, it went all the way through the house. To her right were two closed doors, and to her left, on either side of the staircase, were two more closed doors. She hoped the house hadn't been altered and that behind the doors were big rooms and not little cubicles that had been cut up by centuries of owners. The staircase was magnificent, and she felt sure that the banister was one piece of mahogany. Turning, she looked up to the top of the stairs and saw more closed doors. And just like in the hallway, there wasn't a stick of furniture to be seen. She walked to the far end of the big, bare hallway and looked through the window. Outside were giant trees that might be as old as the house. She wanted to walk under them and sit on one of the little white painted iron chairs. As she watched, a young woman walked from the right side of the house with what looked like a dress wrapped in a towel and a sewing basket in her hand. Joss blinked a few times, thinking she just walked into a time warp. Who sewed today? Who carried a big basket with what looked to be a pincushion top? Had Miss Eddie sent Joss into a place where time stood still? She smiled at the idea. Then, instantly, the smile was gone. Even though it had been months since her friend died, Joss still wasn't ready to let her go. No more funny emails, no more telephone chats that could go on for hours. No Miss Eddie to run home to whenever she had a chance. No more sitting together over a steaming pot of tea and confiding all her worries, fears, and triumphs. Never again would she hear those familiar words. "Of course it's none of my business, but if I were in your place, I would." Joss blinked back tears and gave a glance at the closed door leading off the big hallway, then back at the woman sitting under the shade tree. There were rooms to explore, and she should see about groceries and whether there was a bed for the night. But she looked back at the woman and she won. Joss had to use her key to unlock the back door. Then she went out into the fresh spring air and toward the woman. She was so absorbed in her sewing that she hadn't seemed to hear anyone approach, so Joss had time to look at her. She was quite young, early 20s, and she looked like a poster child for innocence. Her face was a perfect oval and her skin like porcelain. Her brown hair had golden highlights that looked natural, and she wore a dress that could have come out of a Kate Greenaway drawing. Is this Helen? Joss didn't want to startle her, so she said, "Hello," from several feet away, but the young woman went on sewing and didn't look up. It wasn't until Joss was just an arm length away that she saw the woman was wearing earbuds. Smiling, Joss pulled out the chair on the other side of the table and sat down. "Hello," the woman said, not at all startled. She pulled the earbuds off and turned off her iPod. "Let me guess," Joss said. "Enya?" The pretty woman blinked and smiled. "Oh, I see. I look like I've never seen a dirty movie in my life, so I must play angelic music." She pulled the earphone peg out and turned it back on. Out blasted ZZ Top. "I have a hippie mother," she said. "My father's a doctor and a conservative and as conservative as they come. But my mother likes hard rock and plays it as loud as she can. When my father's not home, that is." "The neighbors don't complain?" "One of them did, but my mom poured her a margarita, and when my dad got home, they were dancing together. There haven't been any complaints since." Joss laughed, still looking at the pretty young woman. "Do you get your face from your mother or your father?" "My great aunt Lissy, or so I've been told. She used her looks to snare the richest man in town, had half a dozen kids, then proceeded to spend all her husband's money." Jocelyn didn't let her face show her recognition of the name Lizzie, the woman Miss Eddy had mentioned in her letter. Instead, she said, "My kind of woman. Is that your dress you're sewing?" "Heavens, no. I couldn't afford something like this." She held up the garment to show Joss. It was midnight blue and had an intricate pattern of beads and crystal across the bodice, but several lines of beads were hanging loose. "I told her to be careful. I told her there were to be no trysts in the moonlight and no fumbling in the back seat of the cars. This dress cost thousands, and I said it had to be treated with care. But did she listen to me? Of course not. From the look of it, she did a lot of fumbling." "I think so. And since she was banging on my door at 6 this morning telling me I had to fix it by tonight, it's my guess that she did not fumble with her husband." Joss laughed. "Are you my tenant?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce myself." "I'm Sarah Shaw," she said. "I live in that side and Tess Newland lives over there." The entire town knows who you are. Everybody's been waiting for you since the crack of dawn." The woman at the grocery store stared at me. "My mother?" Sarah said. "She's already called and told me you were on your way." "And the woman on the porch with the broom?" "My Aunt Helen. She called Mom and got a busy signal because Mom was calling me. I would imagine that by now the sheriff has looked up your license plate number." Jocelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she just blinked. "Would you like some iced tea?" Sarah asked. "I just made a pitcher." "I'd love some, but," she hesitated. "Only if it's not half sugar?" Sarah asked as she stood up, carefully rolled the dress in the big towel, then put it on a little white table. Joss could feel her face flushing red. "Don't worry about it. We're used to Yankees down here." "I'm far from being a Yankee. I'm from Florida," Joss said as she followed Sarah toward the big brick house. "That's south of here." "Mm-hmm," she said over her shoulder. "I think maybe Southern is a state of mind as much as a place. And haven't such a lot of people moved from up north down to Florida?" Joss couldn't help smiling. They've reached the screen door of the east wing, and yet again she paused to look up at the house. There was no oddly shaped windows, no rooms that jutted out, nothing that in modern terms made a house interesting. Edelin Manor was as plain and therefore as beautiful as a house could be. Sarah stepped into the coolness of her side of the house, Joss behind her. They were in a kitchen that looked like it had been put in about 1965, and although it had been maintained, it certainly hadn't been renovated. Is this formica? And is that avocado? Sarah said, looking at the drab green refrigerator. Personally, I think the Smithsonians would be interested in this place. They should move it just as it is into a museum. Joss looked at the big white enamel sink under the window and agreed. The kitchen wasn't old enough to be charming. It was just ugly. I think I'll complain to my landlord, Sarah said. You should, Joss said, looking at the old stove. It matched the refrigerator. Her head came up. Oh, wait, I'm your landlord. Sarah laughed as she went to the refrigerator and got out a big pitcher of iced tea. Took you long enough. This whole idea of owning a house hasn't sunk in yet. I haven't even seen the inside. You'll have time to explore. There are some old buildings outside too, but maybe you know that. Sarah nodded toward the little chrome table against the wall. It had a red surface and matching chrome chairs with red seats and backs. Joss sat down and watched as Sarah poured 2 glasses of tea and put what looked to be homemade cookies on a plate. I know very little. All of this is new to me, Joss said. I'm still recovering from Miss Eddie's death? Sarah asked softly. Joss nodded. Did you know her? No, I never met her, but I've certainly heard enough about her. Have you? Joss drank deeply of the tea. She hadn't realized she was thirsty. Then she ate a cookie in 2 bites. When she started on the second one, she looked at Sarah's wide-eyed eyes. Sorry, I've been driving for days, and I guess I forgot to eat. The truth was that she'd been so nervous last night she couldn't eat her dinner, and this morning she skipped breakfast. Now, that is true concentration. Sarah didn't say anything else, but went to the refrigerator, took out a bowl of something, then got some lettuce, mayonnaise, and bread. She put it all on the counter, then held up the bread. Look, it's Yankee bread. No Wonder Bread allowed in my house. Does it have pineapples in it? Sarah looked confused. No pineapple? No bread? At home in Florida, we put pineapples in everything. Or coconut. It was Sarah's turn to laugh. Okay, I'll stop stereotyping. It's just that Edelin is so near Williamsburg that we get more than our share of tourists. They think we fry everything. You don't? Not since we heard the word cholesterol. As Joss took the sandwich on the plate, she said, You don't have to do this, really. I can feed myself. You have a lot to learn about us Southerners. We feed people. I think it's in our DNA, Sarah said. Do you mind if we take this outside so I can finish that dress? Gladly, Joss said as she carried her glass and plate and followed Sarah out to the table. When they were seated, Sarah with the dress across her lap, needle in hand, Joss took a bite. Did you make this? It was chicken salad and had sliced grapes and apples in it. It was delicious, like something from an expensive deli. No, my mother did. She's sure I'm going to starve living alone. Or worse, that I'll eat something that isn't homegrown or organic. She raised these chickens and the apples are from our trees. Joss looked at the sandwich in doubt. You knew this chicken? Sarah shrugged. By the time I was 3, I learned not to name any living thing around our house, except my sisters. I named them, but they still didn't end up in a pot. Joss nearly choked. Don't get me started. Whatever sister story you have, I can top it. Think so? Both my sisters graduated from Tulane with cum laude degrees. Both of them got married the week after they graduated, to doctors, of course, and both of them got pregnant the week after they married, and they were virgins on their wedding day nights. Joss took a drink, then gave Sarah a smug look. No competition. My sisters are steps. They're identical twins, beautiful, naturally blind, and are 5 feet 11 inches tall. You know what they call me? Cindy. Cindy? Sarah's eyes widened. Not right. Short for Cinderella. Sarah didn't want to concede the title just yet. I have 4 utterly perfect nieces and nephews, 2 of each. They never ever forget to say please and thank you. Ever hear of Belle and Ash? The models? Sure. Last week they were on the cover of... No, Sarah gasped. You can't be telling the truth. They're your stepsisters, Jocelyn said. You win. Or lose, I don't know which. I think I'll call my sisters and tell them I'm glad they're mine. She looked at Joss in speculation. How do you stand it? I get by, she said, shrugging as she looked at Sarah. I don't think I would have made it if it weren't for Miss Eddie. She was the one who saved me. She looked down at her sandwich. Speaking of Miss Eddie, she said you lived here all your life. In the town, not in this house. Sure, Joss said cautiously, then chewed while she tried to think of a polite way to bring up what she wanted to talk about. Do you know a man named Ramsay McDowell? Of course, Sarah said, but she didn't look up. What's he's like? Beautiful, brilliant, sophisticated. What exactly do you want to know about him? I take it then that he's a heartbreaker? Sarah took a while to answer, and when she did, there was a caution in her voice. He's broken some hearts, yes. But he's never had his broken? Sarah looked up from the dress. I think I should tell you that Ramsay is my cousin. So, there's family loyalty there. I'd have to know you a lot better than I do now before I say much about him. It's just that he's coming here tonight for dinner, and I'd like to know more about him than just the one conversation we had. Sorry. He seems to be... Rams is coming here tonight? What did you do to rate that? Sarah looked impressed. Nothing that I know of, Joss said. He's handling all the paperwork for the house, so I guess that's work, and he does that at his office. What did you do to get him to come to your house? I don't know, except that I knew the date the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. That would do it. Rams loves smart people, and he loves history. Sarah took a spoon of thread from the box and rethreaded her needle. That's where the girls make their mistake with my cousin. What do you mean? They think Rams is like all the other men and goes for low-cut dresses. He likes those, but he likes brains more. Besides, Tess erased the dress theory forever. As for what else he likes, you can ask Tess about women or food or whatever. She knows him better than we do. Tess? Oh, yes, the other tenant. What does she have to do with Rams? She runs his life. When Joss raised her eyebrows, Sarah shook her head. No, not in that way. Tess runs his law office, and she's so good at it, she tends to run his life as well. If you get flowers on your birthday from Rams, they're probably chosen and sent by Tess. Ah, one of those secretaries. Dotes on him, half in love with him, that sort of thing. Sarah smiled. She says she can't stand him, and she frequently let him know it. So why does she work for him? Why does she live here in Edeling? Sarah shrugged. I have no idea. Tess is a mystery to me, and I know she's a mystery to Rams, but she lets him know when he does something she doesn't like. So what does she have to do with a low-cut dress? You'll have to get Rams to tell you that story. You know, I think I read in some book that when you go on a first date with a man, you do not ask him what his secretary and a low-cut dress have in common. Sarah laughed. I'm sure you're right, but Rams has always been able to laugh at himself. Listen, this is just a warning, but when you meet Tess, don't call her a secretary and do not ask her about that dress. She's sick of the story. All right, Jocelyn said as she pushed her empty plate away. Already she was beginning to feel a bit overwhelmed with all she had to learn. Sarah seemed to know what she was thinking. You'll do fine. Everyone is just curious, that's all. But I do warn you that everyone in this town who actually lives here, that is going to want you to tell them about Miss Eddie. I can understand that, Josh said. The townspeople must have loved her very much. Loved her, Sarah said. The truth is that there are few people still alive who really knew her, except for Aunt Mary Alice, that is. But she can't very well love her now, can she? I don't know, Josh says. Why couldn't your Aunt Mary Alice love Miss Eddie? I thought you two were friends. Surely you must know Miss Eddie's tragic love story. Josh gave a sigh. Until a few days ago, I would have said I knew nearly everything about her, but I'm learning that I didn't know that much. She never mentioned Edelin, Virginia, or this house. I do know that she was once deeply in love with a young man from here who was killed in World War II. Killed, Sarah said. Killed by feisty little Mary Alice Welsh getting herself pregnant by him and making him marry her? When Miss Eddie came home from the war, there was the man she loved married to someone else. Once again, Jocelyn had that feeling of betrayal. This wasn't the story she'd been told. All the love that Miss Eddie had told her about, her great, deep love for David Aldridge, hadn't ended in death. It had ended in a shotgun wedding. No wonder Miss Eddie never mentioned Edeline, and no wonder she lied about her beloved's death. Better death than betrayal. Josh tried to compose herself so Sarah couldn't see what she was feeling. Didn't all this happen a long, long time ago? Josh asked. You make it sound like it happened yesterday. This is Virginia, and we remember things. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the war between the states. She knew who loved whom and who was jilted. So now I tell stories from another war. Whatever. I've heard Miss Eddie's story 1,000 times. The Harcourt family started the town, owned the biggest house, laid out the town square, all that. Even after they lost most of their money, they were still the most important family. By World War II, the McDowells were far richer, but they didn't have the catch-it the Harcourts did. As Joss finished her tea, she tried to put the real story together. So Miss Eddie came home from World War II, her legs a mass of burned scars, and she found out that the man she loved had married someone else? That's right. So what did she do? Joss asked. The house and what money the family had left was in Miss Eddie's name, but she turned the house over to her younger brother. I don't know about the money. My great aunt Lissy used to say that Bertrand wasn't much of a man. What does that mean? That he didn't ride horses up the staircase at midnight? Now, don't let the Yankee in you come to the surface. Sorry, Joss said, but she was smiling. I've read too many romantic novels. Haven't we all? As I was saying, Miss Eddie came back, saw her man had been stolen from her, so she gave the house to her lazy brother and left town. But not before she had Ma draw up a 45-page contract for her brother to sign. She may have been hurt, but she wasn't stupid. Ma? Joss asked. The local law firm, McDowells, Aldrich, and Welsh. Aldrich, Jocelyn said under her breath, then louder. Always the same names. Tell me, do you people ever move away from your hometown like the rest of the U.S. does? They do, but we stay. Joss nodded. Right, the tourists, the outsiders. They come and go, but y'all stay. You didn't say it correctly, so you might as well quit trying. You have to be at least third generation Southern to be able to say you all correctly. I'll keep that in mind. What happened to Miss Eddie's brother? Died in his sleep years ago. Aunt Lissy said he was a man who could do absolutely nothing and make himself believe it was work. I think I may have met him, Josh said. I might even have dated him. I knew the moment we met that you and I had a lot in common. They smiled at each other, two women in mutual understanding, then sat in silence for a while, and Joss looked out over the grounds. She still wasn't used to the idea that she was now a property owner. She glanced back at the house, at the sheer perfect beauty of it, and felt cold chills come over her arms. Nor had she reconciled herself to the fact that the woman who practically been her mother had either left out a lot about her life or had outright lied to her. Jocelyn had lived with the idea of the perfect love Miss Eddie had for a fallen soldier since she first heard it when she was a child. In fact, the image of that love had been her guide, her yardstick that she measured her every relationship against. When a man got serious, Jocelyn asked herself if this was a man she loved with the passion that Miss Eddie had felt for her David. No man, no feelings Joss had ever had come close to the picture of true love that Miss Eddie planted there. But now, Jocelyn was finding out that Miss Eddie's great love was just a tawdry affair. The man had jilted her for another woman. So what are you going to do with the house? Sarah asked, bringing Joss out of Revere. Sell it? Make it into apartments? Joss wasn't fooled by her tone of not caring, of seeming to just be asking a question. So this is why the welcome carpet was rolled out so lavishly, she thought. Had someone told Sarah to do whatever she needed to find out what Miss Eddie's hair was planning to do with the old house? How much do you think I could get for all those old bricks? She waited for Sarah to laugh, but she didn't. She kept her head down as she sewed on the beads. Sarah, Josh said, I'm a lover of history. Since I got out of school, I've made my living by helping people research the past. Sarah looked up at her with cool eyes. It would make a wonderful B&B. Josh groaned. That's not me. I'm more of an introvert. I can talk with one person at a time, but put me around crowds of strangers and I crawl into my shell. Sarah kept looking at her, obviously waiting for something she could tell the townspeople. Joss had a vision of the telephone lines becoming so busy they caught fire. Or maybe the overuse of cell phones would make the TVs go out. Joss couldn't hold out under Sarah's unblinking stare. I don't know what I'm going to do. I really don't. Miss Eddie left me the house and I assume some money, but I have no idea how much. Suddenly, Jocelyn didn't want to tell more about herself than she already had. There were too many things going on inside her mind that were confusing for her to think clearly. And she certainly wasn't about to tell any one of her ideas of writing about Miss Eddie. You know of any job openings? Tess got the last good job in town. Joss glanced toward the far side of the house at the other wing. The doors were closed and the windows shut. By the way, what do you do? Other than repair dresses, that is. That's what I do, Sarah said as she cut the thread. Mostly I tailor dresses for ladies who buy a size 6, then can't get into it on the night they're supposed to wear it. You can make a living at that? Joss asked. Sarah gave a shrug. Joss was sure there was more to what she did for a living, but she didn't seem to want to tell what it was. All Joss hoped was that it wasn't something illegal. She hoped Sarah wasn't growing marijuana in the back bedroom. At that thought, she wondered if all landlords felt this way. What would she do if the bathtub started leaking? What about termites? Miss Eddie mentioned a gardener. What was his salary? Joss glanced at the house and wondered where she was to sleep tonight. Was there a bed in the house? Sarah pulled the cell phone out of her sewing box, opened it, and looked at the time. I have to go. This dress has to be back to its owner before hubby gets home. Hurriedly, she rolled the dress in a towel and gathered it in her arms. Would you take those things in for me? She nodded to the dishes and sewing box. Sure, Joss says, if you trust me. I not only trust you, I think it's possible that I like you. See you soon, she called as she ran back toward the house. Jocelyn sat where she was, looking at the house and trying to make some sense of all that she heard since walking into the lawyer's office. One time when Joss was 16, she come home from school to find that all the steps and mothers and sisters were gone and the house was quiet. Her father was alone in the garage working on one of his bikes. She stood in the doorway watching him for a moment. They rarely had time together as his new family, as Joss always thought of them, took all of his time and energy. Off to Miss Eddie's? He'd asked. Sure, we're reading Thomas Hardy. As she knew, he had nothing to say about that. Gary Minton wasn't given to contemplation. Honey, he said as she walked past him, I hope you don't give her all of your life. I hope you save some for yourself. She liked that he called her honey, but she didn't pay attention to his words. As always, her only thought had been to get away before the steps returned and took over. Their noise and demands ruled the house, her father, everything. Sometimes it seemed that when her stepsisters were around, they controlled the universe. Now, she glanced at her watch. She had hours before Ramsay McDowell was to arrive, but she wanted to see the house and take her time getting ready. She brought a dress that was perfect for a picnic in an old house. Her house, she thought, and smiled up at it. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 2. I got a complaint. They keep switching between her name, Jocelyn and Joss, and it's tripping me up. I just wish they keep it to one or the other. Like, because I keep getting ready to say Joyce when it's Jocelyn. So I got to be careful with that. Okay, so not too much going on. She met Sarah. She haven't met Helen because Helen is the one that's going to be watching her and trying to set her up, right? Okay, so, and then she also found out that Eddie's love did not die. So now she's getting ready to meet up with Ramsay. Let's see how their chemistry go. I shall see you in chapter 3. Bye for now.